Welcome to Crossroads. I'm your host, Joshua Phillip. Today we have Richard Graeber, president of the Bradley Foundation, with us. We're going to talk about some of his philanthropic work, why they do what they do, defending free market causes and good values across the country. So great to have you on the show.
Nice to be with you.
So tell us a bit about the work you do, first off.
Well, our foundation is called the Lynd and Harry Bradley Foundation. We're based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it's a foundation that whose founders were two brothers, 20th century industrialists by the name of Lynd and Harry Bradley, who founded and built an incredible company in Milwaukee called the Allen Bradley Company. And when that company sold in the mid-1980s, it obviously created some resources that today preserve their legacy. They believed that future generations should have the same opportunities that they did, and they believed strongly in our constitutional order, our federalism, our separation of powers, our individual rights. They really believed in free markets, limited government. They believed it was very important to have an informed and capable citizenry. And they really believed in the fundamental institutions of our civil society, neighborhoods, churches, private voluntary organizations. So we're looking for organizations that believe in those principles. And that's what we do. We support, we fund, we're a resource for organizations that, again, are consistent with the mission and vision of these two amazing brothers.
So upholding the principles that America was built on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Restoring, strengthening, protecting the institutions and principles that have made this country great, unique, exceptional.
Yeah, great. So, of course, that's one of the big focuses of the show we're on right now, which is, you know, the idea that America was built on is unfortunately misunderstood, I think, in the world today. America is painted as this, historical oppressor, which is ironic because really America is the model of a country that respects human rights, the model of a country that enables and defends individual liberty. That's the golden shining. That's the shining
Absolutely.
City on the hill, right?
Absolutely.
That is not something that has always existed in the world. And the idea that, of course, communist regimes and socialist regimes look across the ocean and people can see that independent people, right, capable of having their own rights and choosing how they live their lives, can have prosperous and happy lives, much more than what they have, has been a thorn in the side to authoritarian government, since last 100 years at least, right? And so tell me
Absolutely.
about kind of what, in terms of why you do what you do, I guess maybe on a personal note, what is it that made you want to get involved with this?
Well, I had the wonderful opportunity to serve as United States Ambassador to the Czech Republic under George W. Bush. So I lived and worked in a place that at one time was part of the Soviet bloc. And I talked to people day after day who lived through those times and spent their evenings listening to Radio Free Europe to try to get some sense of freedom and opportunity. And the United States was that shining star. But it really brought home for me what we have in this country, all the things that you just said. Opportunities of two brothers in Milwaukee, Wisconsin to build a business from absolutely nothing. That's what we're trying to restore and strengthen and protect. And that's why this country is the greatest place on earth and a leader in the world on so many things. Innovation, entrepreneurship, individual rights. We take for granted, and I saw that living in some place other than the United States. We take for granted the freedoms and opportunities that are here in this country, and we should never do that.
Actually, I hear that from some of my I have Chinese dissident friends who escaped from communist suppression in China, and that's exactly what they say. They say you don't realize what you have. Americans don't appreciate what they have, right? At least some of us.
We've
don't.
never known anything different. But if you go to a place where they have known something different, and actually I worry about places like the Czech Republic because you've got the first generation or even the second generation now of young adults who never did know the communist times, the difficult times. So it's important to bring that back over and over and over again.
Interesting. And I guess when it comes to, of course these days the free market is being painted as a bad thing. I'm sure, of course, with the ALEC conference outside yesterday, there were some protesters, and I don't know what to tell people like that.
Well, we're sponsoring what we call a Bradley Forum today, and the topic is environmental social governance, which is in effect a hostile takeover by some in this country of businesses. Where it used to be, Wind and Harry Bradley could build a business and try to develop the best product or service they could. Today, CEOs, boards of directors constantly have to deal with activists who think that they know better, that they know how a corporation should be governed. Their views on environmental and social issues should be the issues that corporations adhere to at every turn. It's terribly distracting and terribly expensive, and really is disrupting the free markets that we know so well in this country.
Well, this goes back to the old principles of interventionist policies. If we look at writers, I like to quote him a lot on the show. He's one of my favorites, Ludwig von Mises. Right? He's a classical liberal. I guess you call him a libertarian these days. But his idea was that a lot of times these interventionist policies, what they do, right, is they strangle out the middle. They strangle out the middle ground. They oftentimes lead to the same oligarchy that people who support socialism believe they're fighting against. And the way that works is, the government, of course, intervenes. They might want to create obstructions to business and things like that. That makes it so that only the biggest companies are capable of shouldering the cost to engage in the market in that industry. That means that people in the middle and oftentimes at the lower end aren't able to do it. And I think, you mentioned land and stuff.
And even the biggest companies today are being impacted by this. It's a massive distraction from the core business that these people are trying to undertake. And you're right, it somehow pits business against society. That's wrong. I mean, a successful business means more jobs, more opportunity, more employment.
More tax dollars for people who like...
More tax dollars.
Ironically.
Exactly. More of everything that makes this country and makes this economy hum are under attack.
Yeah, well, and that's another piece of irony to, I think, what we're seeing today is people believe that fighting against big business is somehow supporting this, individual cause, when in reality the causes they're fighting for are reliant on tax dollars. And tax dollars, where do those come from, right? It's guys like...
come from the people. Absolutely.
Yeah. It comes from people who create jobs, people who are able to go out and achieve the American dream, right? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And what is the pursuit of happiness? But the ability to try to build your own empire, to try to build what you envision.
Yes.
Right. That is the
Wind and Harry Bradley did.
Yeah.
Build a business, failed several times, but came back and were successful. It's harder to do that in today's world.
Well, it's interesting. So, of course, some of my colleagues I've talked to about this. I have one who's from Iran originally. He lived in Mexico, he lived in China. And he said, America is the only country you can go to where you can fail and that you can get up and do it again and eventually succeed. Yes. And it's a place where you can ask for forgiveness and people will forgive you. You're given a second chance. You don't get that in a lot of countries. And you'll notice a trait with a lot of successful business people that they don't just have it given to them. A lot of them come from very rough backgrounds, very rough childhoods, and a lot of them fail multiple times before they achieve success.
Well, we get criticized when we talk about American exceptionalism, or the fact that this country is unique, or that there are opportunities here that don't exist other places. I'll argue that any day of the week. This is a unique place. This is an exceptional place. And to your point, you're right. People can start from absolutely nothing and be wildly successful in any number of ways. It's not just business.
So you mentioned this forum you're going to be holding later today. The focus is, of course, on environment. And when we talk about environment, this is funny enough, one of the big points that people try to attack business on. But of course, private industry catering to the environment is often the biggest, form of, say, protecting the environment, which is oftentimes misconstrued. If you want to see poorly managed land, look at government land. Look at government managed land, not private land, because private industry, they have an...
Or go to another country. Go to India, go to China, and tell me how the environment is in places like that.
Yeah, China, I mean, one of my focuses for a long time is reporting on the Chinese Communist Party and exposing what it's been doing. But yeah, they're black soil regions, they're fertile regions, they're disappearing. They have deserts moving into the cities, waterways so polluted people can't really do anything with it. They had to relinquish their policy of grain self-sufficiency. They can't grow enough food to feed their own people.
Right.
They moved to animals, and because they're feeding grain and bad water to the animals, they're getting sick.
Right.
I mean, and that is an example of a society that dominates every sector of a person's life.
Yes.
That is where the government controls everything that you do. Yes, they have some degree of the free market, but only to a certain extent. After you get 50 employees, you're going to have a Communist Party liaison.
Right.
You grow large enough, you're going to have to join the Communist Party, and every employee is going to have to join the Communist Party. It is in no way a free market country like the West is. In fact, even socialism, if we want to talk about socialism, because people talk about it these days, it doesn't get rid of that. No communist or socialist country has ever gotten rid of the factories or big businesses or anything. It's just where the state seizes control of it,
Right.
That's all.
Oh, that's correct. Well, and this notion that business or people in the center right don't care about the environment is ridiculous. That's what has been painted, but businesses in this country are working tirelessly to do things better, more efficiently, more environmentally friendly. But you don't always need government to solve these problems. In fact, government is often the worst place to solve some of the problems, not only with the environment, but in our society as a whole. Throwing more government, more tax money at problems, in many cases, just doesn't work. It's private voluntary associations that are really ultimately the answer to a lot of the problems in our society.
Well, and this is a point that Mises brought up, Ludwig von Mises, was that business has a feedback loop. The free market has a feedback loop. He explained it as the greatest form of democracy, because the public need is what drives success in business. So if the public demand for that matter, so if the public demands environmentally responsible business, then the business that provides environmentally responsible products, it's going to be the one that wins out. Government, it does not have a feedback loop. It does not have a feedback model. They look at the broad picture and try to regulate from the top. And whether or not the public buys it, whether or not the public wants it, they're not able to see it.
Right.
Because there's no open market and there's no, echo back from the people when it comes to things.
You're talking
like that.
about free markets.
Yeah.
Markets work. Amazingly enough, they work.
Yeah, go figure. And you'd think over the last 100 years we've seen that because we've seen competing systems in the world. And what happened with every communist and socialist regime, the genocide,
Yes.
100 million to 150 million people dead, and mass environmental destruction, desolation of moral and cultural foundations. People talk about even the Nordic model, but guess what? The Nordic model has the same corporate tax policy as Trump just recently put in.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
people don't know what they're talking about when it comes to this stuff.
Well, democracies republics such as ours are messy by design in a lot of ways, but Winston Churchill was a smart guy when he said democracies might be the worst form of government on earth, except for everything else. And he was right.
Well,
he was right.
And you know what? That messiness, that is the result of the fact that when people are able to choose how they live their lives.
Yes.
They're free to make good decisions, they're free to make bad decisions. And they're free, when they make bad decisions, they're going to have to face the consequences of their poor decisions. And it's those poor decisions and the consequences of the poor decisions that give them the incentive to choose the right path. When you eliminate those things from society, then what kind of a society are you creating? And I would hope that we've seen enough lessons of that over the last 100 years to learn that really the best model is individual liberty. Because individual liberty is what the ability to have consequences, the ability to not always have that cushion there if you fall down, and refuse to get back up, but also having the freedom, and so it's a culture of forgiveness that I mentioned earlier in America, to where you can
Yes.
fail and you can go through those things, but if you want to change yourself, and if you want to improve yourself, the mechanisms are there for you to do so.
It was the genius of our founders, of Madison, of Jefferson, of everyone who was there at those constitutional conventions. That this is the country that they envision, where people would have those freedoms and those opportunities, and they worried about turning this into another monarchy, and they were right. And they did create, intentionally, a system that is inherently messy, but gets to the right result.
Yeah.
In a limited way.
And actually, on that note, actually we can look at the two competing systems at that time. Now, what happened 1776, and then right after that, the French Revolution, right?
Yes.
Now, in America, we'll start with the French Revolution. What happened? They, of course, wanted it on very similar grounds. They wanted to overthrow the kings. They wanted to overthrow all forms of authority. They also wanted to overthrow the church. And in the French Revolution, you had the Committee of Public Safety come about. And you had individuals like Robespierre and, ideological leaders like Rousseau talking about this idea of a new society based on reason. And they thought they could reorganize society, and that the enlightened few should help the ignorant masses. It was not one like the United States where they talked about individual liberty. It was one where they thought individual liberty was something that could not create stability. And so the people who they believed were the smartest should govern and dictate society.
Right.
They rewrote the calendars. They created the first system of state-enforced atheism under the cult of reason. And what did that lead to? That led to the de-Christianization movement, the mass murder of priests and religious believers. That led to the law of suspects, where people even suspected of thinking about opposing the regime were persecuted or killed. That led to the reign of terror in and of itself, which all this was part of. The guillotine was running 24/7, cutting off people's heads. It led to horrific results. And it led to a failed system, and that failed system, unfortunately, was the grain, right, the seed that led to the creation of socialism around the world. But in America, a very different system was created, and it was one where they believed that government was not the highest power in the land, but that the Creator, a God, was the highest power in the land, and that God bestowed unto man, right, rights, right? Rights that could not be taken away. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And they believed that government was instituted among men to defend those rights, right? That these rights pre-exist government and are higher than government. And that if the government so chooses to no longer uphold or protect those rights, then the people have the right to overthrow it. And that was a very unique concept, the idea that there is a law higher than government, right? And that was, I think, the basis of the constitutional republic they created. This idea that a guiding law that cannot be changed should be the one that government should follow, not that law follows government. It was a very different concept. And defending the rights of individuals to build their own lives, to choose how they educate their children, to make bad decisions, make good decisions, and to learn as they go along. And right, what is life otherwise? I think that life where everything is watched and monitored and controlled, we've seen again and again the impacts of that, and the fact that people want to restrain the ability to make poor decisions that come from freedom. And I think you're going to have people who no longer take lessons from it, people who no longer grow as individuals, people who want to be cradled their whole lives, and really want government to play a role that it really was never designed to play. And ironically,
it would seem some of the messages we're hearing from the progressive left these days are not at all consistent with this vision of our founders.
Not at all. Ironically, and you'd think that they could look at past lessons of history and realize what it is that they're actually supporting.
Right.
And they don't seem to see it, unfortunately.
Correct.
Great. So any last messages in terms of what you believe people should know about your organization, what you stand for, and kind of the message you'd like to get across in terms of what you do?
I would
and why
urge
you think
people
it's
to
important?
look at our website, bradleyfdn.org. It outlines our 4 giving principles of constitutional order, of free markets, of informed citizens, of a civil society. We quietly go about our work finding organizations that are aligned with that mission and with that vision, and we're going to keep fighting the fight. Places like the Bradley Foundation are in it for the long haul.
Great. Real pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much.
Good to meet you.
Thank you. Everyone, please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.